There you go. Those are the magic words.
I don't think we have a mic.
Not me enough. Oh,
I don't want to unmute on this one. Oh, I see. Don't look at that one.
we're gonna go.
Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Corbett, that this special meeting of council be opened at 7 p.m. All in favor? Carried. Then, moved by Councillor Featherstone, seconded by Councillor McGuinness, be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Bonfield hereby acknowledges receipt and approve. Oh, let's do. Got to go over it first. Sorry. All right, I'd like to
You got
introduce.
your disclosure too.
Yeah. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof? Hearing none.
Yes, go ahead.
Then I'd like to welcome Dean DeCare from BDO to go over the draft 2022 financial statements.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Worship. Hi, everyone. For those that I have not met before, my name is Dean DeCare. I've been an engagement partner for over 25 years or over 20 years now with BDO Canada, and I've been in public accounting for 33 years now. So this is what I do for a living. I specialize in non-for-profits, municipalities, and government sector entities that are in the province of Ontario. So I'm very happy to be here tonight in front of you, and I'm going to walk you through with Nikki's help, I'm going to walk you through the draft financial statements for the Corporation of the Township of Bonfield for the year ended December 31st, 2022. And then we're at the point now after this, if they are passed by council, then I'll be in a position to sign the audit report and we can get these issued to you. Okay. So I'm just going to make a couple of comments before I start the presentation, and then I'll walk you through the audit findings report that you can see on the screen here. Welcome to Nikki, the new CEO, back from May, right? May 2023. The external audit, we like it to be done certainly in the first 6 months of the year, ideally the first 4 months of the year for municipalities. The reason that we're here late is that we did come in April, but there were a number of accounts that were not reconciled. So a lot of work has gone on by the staff here at the Township of Bonfield to get those accounts in order. And those included things like reserve entries, capital asset entries, etc. We will endeavor for 2023 to get out here earlier to walk through and provide some assistance to Nikki and the team so we can try and get the audit done much quicker, to get in front of you a lot quicker, because again, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about for 2022, maybe we might even remember some of the things that happened back in 2022. I'm going to reflect on a couple things, including the utilization of gas tax funds, which again, I got an informal update from your CAO as to the utilization in 2023 on that. And that's because the clock ticks in terms of utilization of those funds. So we had about $1 million in various government grants sitting in our bank account and on the books in 2022 that have since been deployed or utilized in the township in 2023. So we'll look at that. We'll subject that to audit procedures next year. You will hear me talk a little bit about reserve funds during the course of my presentation in terms of how much the municipal reserve funds were at December 31st, 2022. In addition, I'll talk a little bit about property taxes receivable, long-term debt, landfill obligation, which we got a study done by Pynchon, pardon me, the engineering firm back in 2022, and then we'll likely get an updated one for our landfill obligation, probably somewhere near 2025. Okay. So that being said, I don't know if you're going to put the financials on the screen or not, but everyone has a copy of the financials. I'm going to walk you through that first before I do this presentation. Is that okay, Nikki? So on page 4 of your financial statements, so the way that public sector accounting works in Canada, the government through the Accounting Standards Board in Canada down in Toronto, they set unique accounting standards for governments, and that relates to all federal, territorial, municipal, indigenous, provincial governments. So you all prepare financial statements using the exact same format. On page 4, you can see how the flow of the format. It starts with financial assets, which lists at December 31st, 2022, all of your cash, your investments, your property taxes receivable at the end of December, as well as any accounts receivable at the end of December. Now, so all of those things they either are in your bank account at December 31st, or they turn into, they eventually come into the bank account shortly thereafter, after the period end being December 31st. So you can see roughly $2.2 million in cash and investments, which is good because your municipal reserves are around 1.7 million. So you have that money invested in bank and investments. You'll see property taxes receivable of 283,000. Again, I'll talk about this in a couple seconds, but what I want you to focus on there over the next couple of years is the arrears taxation. So, you know, as property taxes become greater than 12 months due and owing, of course, interest accrues on them, but it becomes, you know, more and more of a challenge to collect. So that's something that we want to stay on top of. And then accounts receivable, 755,000, looks a little weird. It's usually about 60,000 bucks. It's usually HST that's owed to us. But at the end of December, you had a very large FedNord grant that was owing to you based on the work that was done on the water park. Okay, and that was recognized in revenue in 2022. Then your financial position shows you your liabilities. So you have normal trade payables, $533,000, which is roughly where it should be. I'd like to see it closer to $400,000 because that's roughly how much you spend. You have a budget here in Bonfield of roughly around $4.5 million a year. Deferred revenue, that was the gas tax that I talked about. There's other OSIF and some other monies that are in there, other provincial grants. So why it's sitting in here is because it's not yet spent. So when those monies are spent, they become a revenue and an expenditure in that particular year. In 2022, that means that we had $989,000 in unspent monies that was sitting in our bank account at the end of December. But again, I think you're going to see that utilized, and you'll see that number much lower in 2023 when that audit occurs. You didn't take on any new long-term debt, which is good. So $1.7 million on well over $8 million of infrastructure and assets, which includes buildings, land, roads, all of your culvert work and infrastructure, as well as any equipment, okay, that is owned and you have legal title by the Township of Bonfield. So $1.7 million, and you're paying that down by roughly around $120,000 a year, that debt. Then you have the landfill that I talked about earlier. I kind of highlighted. This is a number that you do want to stay on top of. It'll change, you know, over the years as we get close to closure of the landfill site. So what happens is that you set up a liability now based on the present value in today's dollars of what it's going to cost you to close the landfill and then maintain it, or what we call monitor it for a reasonable period, which is usually 25 years. In the province of Ontario. So it's usually peanuts in terms of how much it costs on an annual basis to monitor it, but there are some closure costs up front when you actually have to cap the cells, etc. And we get an engineering report every 3 or 4 years that tell us, you know, how many cubic meters of the landfill you still have capacity, and how many actually have been utilized of that landfill. And we also have an estimate of costs based on known actual costs in the past of closing landfills. So you have a net financial debt of $305,000. Again, that's actually pretty good at the end of December 2022. That's the number that you hear about in the public all the time when they talk about the province of Ontario and the federal government is over $1 trillion, and the province of Ontario is around $600 billion, pardon me, in net debt, while the Township of Bonfield is $300,000. Your assets, you do track inventory. So at the end of December, it is important, and we're coming up with on your year end now at the end of this December. So just make sure that you do have a process in place to track any inventories that you have on hand. Usually it's fuel and sand and things of that nature that you buy bulk and then utilize it afterwards. So it's prepaid stuff that you've bought, but tangible stuff that you inventory and you cost out at the end of December. And your tangible capital assets, we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's the $8.7 million. That's the book value, accounting value of all of your infrastructure. So what we do when we buy a building, let's say for $1 million, and it's going to last for 40 years, we depreciate it over 40 years down to zero. But in fact, as you know, that building actually could appreciate in value. So this is not value. It's not insured value, appraised value, or anything of your equipment and your real property or land and buildings. But it is what is called your carrying amount or your book value based on accounting principles. So that's your financial position at the end of December of 2022 as you headed into this year that we're in right now, that we're almost 12 months, 11 months, a little over 11 months into now. Now, how did you do in 2022? Well, the Township of Bonfield, you'll see, has, like I said, somewhere around a $4.5 million budget, or roughly around $400,000 a month. Now, you're going to see revenues were $5.7 million. That's unusual. And the only reason revenues were $5.7 million in 2022 is because of the large grants that you received to do the waterfront and the water park, okay, the splash pads, etc., all of that stuff. So over $2 million was received in grants, which meant that Bonfield did not have to go out and borrow money. So you did not have to take on new debt to do that project because you were able to access grants, which is absolutely perfect. The way accounting standards work, that shows as a revenue, whereas the actual expenditure does not show as an expense in any of your categories. It actually shows as what's called a tangible capital asset, and it will get depreciated over a number of years. Okay, property taxes, you'll see at 3.2 million. The budget was 3.3 million. And don't forget, property taxes includes the normal increase. It was about a 7% increase over 2021. And we are seeing increases, somewhere between, 5 and 6%, inflation, etc. But it also includes supplementals. So anytime that any of your taxpayer residents have made changes, significant changes to their properties, those impact adjustments are reflected in your property taxation revenue. Your expenses, very consistent with budget, which is good. And again, expenses, this is nothing to do with reserves. It's nothing to do with tangible capital assets. This is normal period expenses to run the township. It costs roughly $1 million for general government, okay, which is our people and supplies and everything to keep the actual township going. $600,000 protection. That's, for the most part, that's your OPP contract, fire, etc. 1.5 million transportation. Again, a big chunk of that is amortization because that's our roads and road work and things of that nature, which is your largest budget item. Okay, that's why Public Works is such a large portfolio. Environmental services, again, tends to be a little bit smaller, but it was up from 2021. You'll see health, social, and family services. So in that 873,000 are some of the things that we talked about, some of the things that you do transfer payments. So you do transfer payments to either the DSAB, to the North Bay Parry Sound District Health Unit, the Castle Home, or the Home for the Aged, as it's called. And then you'll see recreation and culture, planning and development, etc. So you'd like your revenues expenses to break even. They don't. You actually are showing a large surplus of 1.2 million, but that's because you went and got a very large capital grant to do the waterfront park of roughly $1.2 million.
So for transportation services, the actual, so the budgeted was 900,000. And the actual was 1.5, but is that because environmental services, like those two, are kind of a wash?
No, because we don't in Bonfield, and we'll talk about this over the next couple of years, but you don't budget for amortization, which is a large expense. It's almost $400,000, and the bulk of amortization is in transportation. Okay, so your budget number of $1 million is going to always be lower than the actual of 1.4 million because, of course, we depreciate all those transportation assets. Okay, and there was a fair amount of maintenance and supplies that in 2022 as well. So at the same time as, yes, we had this very large addition of, I think, around 1.4 million for the splash pad and all that stuff. There was a lot of repairs and maintenance that was done in and around, whether it was roads and other things that just didn't meet the definition of an asset that went into that account.
That's came out of operating budget.
That instead got booked out of the operating account. That's correct. Exactly right. Okay, so on a public sector accounting basis, you did budget the Township of Bonfield budget for a $200,000 surplus. You can see that number, 200,932. Actually ended up at a 1,239,646 surplus. Why the difference? The difference is mostly because of the FedNor and other grants that were received for the splash pad project, the waterfront project. Pardon me. The statement of changes in net debt. The one thing I will highlight to you here, it's a positive number, which is a good thing. So the change in net debt was 134,000. That meant that you paid down your debt by $134,000, because this actually contemplates what this statement does is it says, okay, yes, I had a surplus, accounting surplus of 1.2 million, but I have to add back amortization, which is a non-cash expense of $333,000. I subtract the amount that I spent on all infrastructure, tangible capital assets, including the waterfront project back in 2022 of 1.4 million. And I land at $134,000 positive, paying down our financial liabilities, which again is a good thing. In terms of cash on page 7, again, Bonfield, you continue to generate positive cash from normal day-to-day operating transactions. So, and you want to be in a position to do that. So you want every year to be able to budget to make positive operating fund cash flows of around $1 million. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to invest in infrastructure for all of the inhabitants and ratepayers, taxpayers in Bonfield, and it allows you to pay down debt, okay, of that, what was it, $1.7 million of long-term debt. So you make your debt payments, which roughly are around $130,000 a year. Also allows you to invest in infrastructure. And again, you know, what the CAO will do is make sure that you continue to approve what's called the capital budget. So when you do have large items that you're going to do in the community over the next couple of years, it will get brought to council, and you'll, as much as you approve an operating plan, an operating budget every year, you should also be approving a capital budget. The big difference between a capital budget and an operating budget is 12 months. A capital budget could be 3 years, depending on the nature of the project. Okay, because some projects extend beyond the calendar year. Okay, or they start in one calendar year and end in another calendar year. That's what makes capital projects a bit unique. Your accounting policies. The Public Sector Accounting Board in Canada did not change any accounting policies during the pandemic period. And they did that for a number of different reasons. So everything on page 8, 9, and 10 are exactly the same as they were, and perhaps they probably are very similar to what they were, Mayor Neri, to when you were the mayor before. So there has been very little movement in the public sector in terms of changing government accounting standards. There will be some significant changes to accounting standards over the next couple of years, though, in the public sector, including how you measure post-employment benefits, if that's applicable. So if any of your collective bargaining agreements allow for people to receive benefits when they retire, including financial instruments. So if you invest, and you guys have about $500,000 invested in, but it's in safe term deposits. But if you invested in things like equities or mutual funds or things of that nature, you'd need to have some more disclosure. And there's some other changes afoot in the public sector that you'll have to monitor over that we will help you monitor over the next couple of years, or your external auditor will, okay, assuming it's BDO. In the notes to the financial statements, again, I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. Note 1 is just, you know, it just shows you your bank balances, your current accounts in your bank, but your checking accounts, $1.6 million. Your investments, and it shows much different interest rates than over the past couple of years, because of course the interest rate market started to come up back in 2022. And then note 3 is one that I kind of focused on at the beginning. I do want to make sure that in your CAO and team will also know this. It's making sure that we are on top of not just the current taxation, which is, let's say, about $3 million a year from our property tax owners, from our property taxpayers, pardon me, but it's also anyone that owes from the year before. So yes, I want to collect in all of my 2020, in this case, 2022 taxation revenue from everyone, from all my residents and businesses in the community. But I also, anyone that owes from 2021 or 2020 or 2019, let's either collect or let's follow our process that we're allowed to under the law, right?
We don't know the extent of how far back that goes, though, right?
It's not too bad. For the most part, it's 2 years.
Is it 2 years?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The bulk of it. Note 4 I talked about already in terms of the reason receivables were so large. There was a couple things. One was HST, and there was a big HST rebate that you were entitled to, and that's because of all the money that you spent on the waterfront project, which was very unique to 2022. in addition to the FedNor grant. Then on the next note is your tangible capital assets. And I like for council to be aware, because this is something to be proud of when you're talking to voters, the electorate, how much, again, in 2020, how much did we invest in infrastructure? How much did we invest in our community to have safe roads for you to drive to and from work, or to and from events, or things of that nature? How much did we invest in the community at large? And you can see that the land improvements was the bulk of it in 2022, because that, of course, was the waterfront project. And then some small improvements we did to buildings, bridges and roads, vehicles, and machinery and equipment. Much, much more different than the year before, 2021, when very little capital expenditures were made. There was only, what, $196,000 spent on bridges and roads, etc. And again, I did talk to Nikki before this particular official meeting about what have we done in 2023. And I think you'll see a significant investment in bridges, road work, etc. in 2023, because it needed it, and also because we could utilize some of our government grants that we had sitting in the bank account. Gas tax money as an example, because the worst case scenario, and I think you'd be the only township in Ontario that would ever have to give gas tax back to, and we do not want to do that after the 4-year period or 5-year period. You do have on page 15, note 6, I talked about in terms of making sure you count your inventory at the end of the year. Note 7, you do have available to you a line of credit. Over the years, we have had to use it from time to time. And that would be if there was a particular large expenditure, you would dip into that while you were waiting for a government grant to come in, or while you're waiting to permanently finance something. But again, at the end of December 2022, you were using none of it. But it's $1 million. Okay, and each year you pay a small amount, I think, to keep that credit, that operating line of credit available to you. If you go to the next page, you'll see a breakdown of your long-term debt. For the most part, you haven't really gone out to markets. You're not going to see debentures or anything, or Infrastructure Ontario or anything like that in here. You're going to see traditional bank financing, bank term loans, and the largest one being the $1 million loan that is being paid down roughly about, I don't know, $3,000 a month or something in principal payments. But this gives you a flavor for the interest rates on those various loans. And it gives you an idea of, a couple of them that will actually fall off the table in the next couple of years, okay? Including the first one that likely will be gone at the end of 2023. The landfill closure I talked about. So although there is a $300,000 and some landfill obligation, what you're doing is you're making sure that you as a council are saving for that point in time when you need to have that money to pay that bill to close the landfill, which is still, years down the road. But it also a reminder to you that you do have sitting in your municipal reserves of $1.698 million or whatever the case may be. I think it's around $60,000 for the landfill. Okay, it's not, nearly the $300,000, but it continues to be tracked as you do your planning. I heard you talk about your planning. Then I encourage you as a council to look at that, which I'm going to show you in a couple of pages. Look at your reserves and reserve funds and say, okay, do these still make sense? Otherwise, you need council motion to move the reserve funds to and from the different causes. On the next page, this is what I talked about, the deferred revenue. So this is your federal gas tax monies, the Ontario Resource Development Support Grant that you got in 2022, OSIF monies, etc. So that was all sitting in the bank account. And again, so what you have to do is file reports with AMO, I believe, with AMO every year, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, to show them how your gas tax monies were spent, because they're the steward of the gas tax monies, federal and provincial gas tax monies. So every year you give them a report, you show them this is how much we spent this year, and we use the grants from 2021 or 2022, but you just can't let it go 5 years, because otherwise you have to give it back. So you will spend that, and indeed you have spent most of it. And just a reminder that you continue to pay into OMERS on behalf of your workforce, and the contributions to OMERS in 2022 were around $60,000. And OMERS continues to be in a deficit, but I think it's the second largest pension plan in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And that's, again, based on market values of equities, etc. I don't think it's going insolvent, but it's certainly is a.
It's not fully funded.
It is not fully funded, no.
No.
but it is a very large plan.
Yeah.
Note 13 is your OPP contract. Again, very similar to most townships and smaller municipalities that sign that contract with the OPP. A couple of years ago, I think it was there was this council or predecessors to this council that again just always made sure that they did have a presentation at least annually. I think they will come and make a presentation as to they'll give you a full report on incidents, all the different things in Bonfield that the OPP has done, and they'll give you a cost breakdown of what their levy is going to be. And I think it's usually it's a multi-year contract, I believe, that we sign with the OPP, which is your largest protection cost.
Their structure was changing though, right?
It did
The
change a
structure
couple of
was
years ago,
changing?
yeah.
And for big service boards, that'll change as well. We expect it in 2024.
So on page 20 is the reserves that I talked about. Sorry, I said 1.698. It's 1.724 million in reserves and reserve funds. And that's the one where you can see you've got your asset management plan, strategic priorities reserve, 578,000. Well, that's one where Councillor Corbett was talking about planning and things like that. There's a fair amount of money there to do planning for your great township. So, and that has been set aside. It's sitting in the bank account. It's just waiting to be utilized. You have an efficiencies reserve fund, capital emergencies, the tax rate stabilization, or what some municipalities call working fund reserve. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can see the different reserves. But I encourage you again to just make sure you get reports annually as to utilization of those those reserve funds. That does not mean that you can take them and bring them into revenue. That means that when they are spent and that they'll be in your operating statements as expenditures, that you then draw down that reserve fund. Taxation, I talked about already, which was, I think, a 6.3% increase year over year. I know it's always a popular source of conversation, but that includes, that's just not the rate, the mill rate increase. That includes assessed value increases, right, from MPAC, as it does its triannual reassessments, and it also includes the supplementals for people that do significant additions to their homes, etc.
But there hasn't been a assessment.
No, not till next year, I think.
8 years, yeah.
Yeah, they held it again,
Oh, they held it again?
They did hold
Okay.
it again, yeah.
which is why you see the inflated numbers of tax increases versus
Yes.
assessment growth and tax.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then you're forced to change the mill rate.
Right.
Yeah. So earlier on page 22, I talked about
Oh,
about,
can we go back to number 16?
yes,
Oh, so, it says in 16 that the 2021 was not prepared on a basis consistent with that used to report actual results.
yeah, the budget never is. So for all municipalities, so when you do a budget on a cash basis,
Okay.
so then this note converts it to a PSAB base, public sector accounting basis.
Okay.
So it reconciles the $200,000 that for financial reporting purposes, for your cash purposes, you must balance to zero. That's your bylaw, right?
Okay.
And you did. So in this particular case, you balanced to zero, but that included long-term debt payments, which are not an operating expense, and it included transfers into and out of reserves, which
Yeah.
again are not operating expenses.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So-
So did that skew the numbers then?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Continue doing what you're doing. Continue to do your budget on a cash basis. Like this is my money in, money out. And then you just have to make sure you provide this reconciliation at the end of the year. That we help you with this reconciliation. In note 17, so earlier I showed you, where money was spent. So was it spent in general government, protection, environmental services, transportation, those different departments? Note 17 shows you the exact same 4.4 million, but how it was spent. So how much was it spent on labor, our workforce? We have $1.3 million worth of T4s, employees, right? You can see the materials was up in 2022, and I suspect it had to do with some of the capital projects. And then you have contract services, interest expense, and amortization. And amortization, again, like I talked about, is a non-cash expense. Interest expense is not high at all, and partly because you have not borrowed a lot of money, and partly because of the way interest rates were at the time. And again, they're creeping up, but the announcement came out today, Bank of Canada is holding it at 5%, I think. Yeah. And that's because they've recognized, and this is a good thing for Bonfield, they've recognized that the gap between the demand and supply is shrinking. And the Bank of Canada actually announced today that they believe that it's actually, flipped a little bit, where we actually have an excess supply of labor compared to the demand. I haven't seen that in my practice. So, and different pots of the country will certainly argue that a bit, but anyway, at least they've held it at the 5% for now. You have a little library next door, so you have a little statement there, and then you have a disclosure that some of you may find useful at the end, and this is required accounting disclosure on what we call segments. So if you want a little more detail on if you're, as a counselor, you're really interested in public works or transportation or health and family services, you can actually see revenue and expenses of those particular departments on the last 2 pages of your financial statements. So long story short, under the Municipal Act in Ontario, you're required to have an external audit firm. You do have, we've been blessed enough to have been the auditor for Bonnfield for a number of years. And again, we're happy to provide a clean opinion on these financial statements. Although late and tardy, it is now coming, and I've explained some of the reasons why. And I certainly would hope to get back and see you guys the next time we see you. Hopefully, will be in April. That would be my goal, anyway. So just a couple last things, and then I'll open it up, turn it back, Your Worship, and to see questions of council. But in this presentation, if we just slide down a couple slides, the purpose of this is, every year we're required to provide something in writing to you. You have a copy of this. By all means, if you're, struggling with sleep or anything like that, take a look at it tonight and go through page by page. But it does remind everyone what the responsibilities are of the audit firm, those charged with governance, being mayor and council, and of course, management. Okay, all three of us have different responsibilities: prepare the accounting, audit the accounting, oversee the process. Very simple. Okay, and the idea is that all of us together reduce the risk of there being an error or a fraudulent act in the organization. Yep, the next page. So that was what I talked about in terms of fraudulent acts. I have deep conversations with many clients about this. There are procedures that are performed under the Canadian Assurance Standards as it relates to fraud. There's a whole standard on what different things we need to do. There has to be an element of unpredictability. From time to time, we need to do something that, traditionally we have not done in terms of an audit procedure. Management sometimes is a little taken back by that, but that's what the audit standard says we have to do. That could be a spot check. It could be showing up on a day earlier than we were supposed to. It's just different things that over the years that we've tried to design. And it also is looking at, in the old days, we would look for any checks to mayor and council, any checks to CAO, that type of thing. So those are some of the things we're looking for misappropriation or breaches of good processes. Yep, you can keep going. We have to use the materiality. We chose materiality of 115,000. So that, again, that's taking a percentage of your annual budget, which we say your budget was roughly around $4.5 million a year, 4.8 million a year. So you take 2% of that to get to the $115,000. And that what does that materiality do, Dean? Well, it dictates the amount of testing that we do. How many invoices do we have to look at? How many property tax bills do we have to look at? How many tax roll items do we have to look at, etc.? How many people do we look at their pay?
Is that a standardized?
Yeah, the standard is the percentage of your budget. Yeah. So, and that comes out with the dollar amount. Yeah. And again, in the profession, I just came from another meeting where the board asked me the same question. They said, what are you seeing in the marketplace right now? And we're seeing firms actually using a much higher number, which leads to less testing. I'm not so sure that serves the greater public. So, status of the audit, I'm just waiting for your approval, being those charged with governance. I'll get a wrap letter signed by Nikki, and I think we've documented our subsequent events. It's a long subsequent event period because it's 11 months, but certainly that means that asking questions on anything that's happened from January 1st, 2023 to December 6th, 2023 that may impact the old 2022 financials, and I don't think there's anything. In terms of audit findings, I think I talked about the fact that where we focused on revenue, landfill management override, and accounts payable. Revenue, making sure that your grants are recorded in the proper spot in the proper accounting period, and your property taxation is recorded properly. So that's your grants and your property taxes, which is most. You have some user fees, but not significant user fees. Landfill, because it's involves an element of estimation. Management override, we look for journal entries. Journal entries are bad. Okay, everything that goes through this budget should be because it was a purchase payable to a supplier, it was paid to a person because they're an employee, It was revenue that came in because I own property in here, or it was a grant money that came in because I applied for a grant for a project I was doing. Very simple. General journal entries are not our favorite as auditors. So we will look at general journal entries. And anywhere where one individual, and that's why it's really good, you need a good, strong leader in Nikki moving forward to make sure that any significant tasks in the township that are performed get performed by one person and get looked at by a second person, which is what we call segregation of duties. And accounts payable is by far, after 30 years, I've said this to everyone that I've ever met, especially at a party, that accounts payable is where errors occur. So think about it for a second. At the end of the year, you were talking about the party, okay? You've got a social coming up January 1st. So what accounts payable is, everything the town of Bonfield purchased in November, December of 2023, okay, has to get set up. If you didn't pay for it yet, you get set up as payable. And then you pay for it in January or February. No problem. That's perfect accounting. But we recognize it in the period you bought the good or service. What happens is that sometimes people aren't giving to Nikki or the bookkeeping team, the accounting team at Bonfield, oh, I forgot to give you this invoice for this, whatever, the gravel I bought, or whatever. Like, inherently, it's one of those areas. That's why we look at stuff you bought, you paid for it in your bank account, January, February, March, to see if it should have been in December. And that's just one of the areas we spend a lot of time.
So do we not have a cutoff? It's
Oh,
normally there's a cutoff, right? And so accruals have to be in by a certain time in January,
Right, yeah.
and then you can set them up. in
Oh,
the
Donna,
system.
that is brilliant. That is exactly right. And usually it's the third week of January. So, and that email goes out anytime between now and the end of December to all the managers, department heads, that all invoices for any just 2023 supplies or goods come into finance or to the accounting team, and that has to come in by January 21st.
And the good or service must be delivered in
By December 31st.
Yes, in
Yeah, that's right.
2023.
Yep.
Okay.
And I've looked at townships, municipalities, large municipalities over the years that would, book payables and transactions for stuff that came in January.
Yeah.
And you know why they did it? Because they had room in their budget,
Yeah.
which was so frustrating to audit firms,
Yeah.
because we're saying that's not accounting. But you know why they did it? Because they've been doing it for
Yeah.
decades like that. It was just changing mentality. It doesn't matter if you have 12,000 left in your budget. Either carry it forward or don't have this mentality where council's going to shrink my budget because I didn't spend it all. I didn't spend it all because I was efficient, or you didn't spend it all because I didn't have time, or there's other reasons, right? But anyway, that was old accounting. I'd like to think that a lot of that's gone, Councillor Clark, but
Do we have a threshold, or sometimes there's a threshold for liabilities?
What do you
But
mean?
so anything under $5,000, well, that's a big amount though. Because our budget's not that big.
no,
Yeah.
but typically what happened is you sent an email out and all invoices would come to you. What you could do, what Councillor Clark is saying is exactly right. A lot of organizations will set it at X dollars.
Yeah.
So anything, if you have a bell bill that's $200 a month, you don't care about that.
No.
But what you do is you still track all that separately. You give it to the audit firm at the end of the year. Say, here were all our immaterial ones. And then we add it up.
I don't know that there is a threshold.
I don't think we've ever had one in Bonfield. No, it's just anything that's outstanding. If it's $10 or $10,000, give it to us.
Yeah.
But inherently, I've seen clients where a bill will come in for something that would happen in November. The bill came in the next August from the vendor.
Yeah.
Lawyers are famous for this. Sorry, where they'll render a bill a year later.
Yeah.
But for time booked, anyway, not to pick on lawyers.
No.
Mary. The internal controls, again, what you would expect as a council is you say, Dean, great to do sign an audit report for us. Let's get our FIR filed, our financial statements filed with the province and blah, blah, blah. And we have these for the taxpayers to see, so we're transparent. But give us recommendations every year. So, on anything we can be doing better. So we're going to work with Nikki and the team. As soon as we get up to speed on 2023, we'll produce a big letter for her, and she can share that letter with you or not, but that on anything we think can be done better.
So procurement policies, things like that.
That exactly, procurement policies, payroll, and again, posting capital TCA to expense accounts, posting reserve to revenue accounts, things of that nature. a lot of the reason municipalities do it, the city of North Bay used to do it, a lot of the reason they do it is because that was the way they balanced their books. You know what I mean? Oh, am I on public camera?
Yeah.
Okay, hypothetically. Hopefully you're enjoying that at home. But all municipalities, again, do that on a cash basis, right? And then you adjust at the end of the year, and it was all adjusted perfectly for those listening. Okay. You can see some of the adjustments that were made in 2022. You know, that's the reason it took a little bit longer. We'd like to get that down, you know, obviously to a manageable level, and we will. That's our goal over the next year.
But it shouldn't hamper our budget process.
It does not.
Okay.
No. Yeah, and in terms of your budget process, you just need to make sure you have accurate historical information to do your budgets for 20, you know, to do your budgets. So,
Right. So
you
we
have a
can-
decent idea based on the history of Bonfield. You know exactly how much you're spending in the key areas on payroll, protection, environmental. You know your contracts with OPP, et cetera. You can still do your budgets. You know what your assessment that you guys just talked about. You know what your assessment base is. You know what your mill rate was the year before. You know what some of you may have got elected on saying, you know, we're only going to increase whatever. So you have all the information you need for sure.
But with the audit being this late, aren't we missing out on funding opportunities?
That's a good question. So certainly the one thing that I'm aware of is the municipal partnership grant. They can hold that. The province can hold that on you if the audit's late. In terms of, you should not be penalized unless you go after a FedNor or NOHFC, some kind of grant like that, where they ask for your most immediate previous financial statements and you don't have them. That could be an issue, Dan, or Councillor McGinnis. Yes. So that's why we need to get them done early. Like, we need to get them done by, you're technically supposed to get the FIR done at the end of May, are you not? Yeah. And then, of course, your audit financial statement is a big chunk of that FIR.
Yeah. So technically, our budget should be not August even. So.
Yes.
No, exactly. It'd be
July.
great if council was, actually, it'd be great if you were, your budget season would be start in September for the next year.
Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah.
And you'd have good information in front of you to do that.
Oh, it's going that way.
Yeah. Well, and then
We've
you're,
already started working on the
yeah, and
2024
we're
budget.
you're just forecasting for the previous year.
Okay, so in terms of other required communications, this is my last slide. The things that we talked about, any disagreements during the course of the audit, if we had any disagreements with either the accounting team or the CAO or anything of that nature, when trying to get information, we'd report that to you. Because we have to document that in our audit work and paper files. Any material uncertainties, the biggest one is the gas taxes, the landfill, there's still a bit of a guess to it because of the nature of the estimate, but it's supposed to be a very close dollar amount to what you will eventually have to pay out to close up that landfill site. If there were any breaches and if we saw that you breached any law or regulation, we would bring that to your attention. If it came to our attention, subsequent events and segregation of duties I already talked about, making sure
So
that
all of that would be in here if.
it'd be
this-
in here, not in the audit financial statement, in here. Yeah, in the bedtime reading one.
Okay.
The only last thing that I'll highlight to you guys, this is all stuff that you can read at your own leisure about the auditing profession and regulators and stuff. I think there's a slide on, if you keep going down on ESG and sustainability. And that's something that you may want to look at if you do have some money set aside. Yeah, right there. So I really do think everyone's going to have a reporting mechanism on ESG over the next couple of years, and that is environmental social governance. So that's the sustainability KPIs that you hear about when you're reading. Public companies have to do it, like the Walmarts of the world, etc., have to start doing this. BDO, for example, has an ESG report that we have made public on the internet. I suspect it will. If I was a betting person, I would bet that it's going to trickle down to municipalities, and it's a good thing to share your story about what you're doing in those three categories, in those areas. So, how are you dealing with diversity issues? How are you dealing with clearly good, strong governance, which is council meetings, regular, frequent agendas, all that kind of stuff. And celebrating success of those things. And what are you doing in terms of your carbon footprint? What are we doing at the Township of Bonfield with regards to the environment, and how responsible are we being with respect to, what did I hear you say about Councillor Corbett said, I don't use paper anymore. we actually are, doing, we have virtual abilities, or, we've gone paperless. The township of Bonfield has gone paperless, or I'm just giving an example, things of that nature. So what you do is you actually do a write-up, and many people are very talented with that.
Clear garbage bags, like.
Yes, and you do a write-up that people can read, and then if you want value added to it, the IASB, or the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, has set out a framework that will allow audit firms and non-audit firms to attest to the comments you're making, to give them validity. Because I can tell you guys I have 6 kids. You may not believe me, right? But then if I had someone actually, an independent person come in and say, actually, I've counted all 6 of them, you don't understand what I'm saying? So that just watch for that going forward. But in the meantime, between AI technology and those are the hot things that are out there right now, in terms of the marketplace, if you will. So AI being like let's get the best use of technology in Bonfield. And then, of course, how responsible are we being with respect to these key items around governance, sustainability, and diversity, inclusion, and of course, the environment. So I'll turn it back to your worship to see if there are questions for me from council.
Okay, thank you, Dean.
And make sure that you delete that one comment that I made.
It's living forever.
It's
We've
there
learned
forever.
that.
Yeah,
Does anyone have any questions of Dean?
No.
No, you answered
No.
all of my questions.
So can I read the motion now? Moved by Councillor Featherstone, second by Councillor McGuinness. Be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Bonfield hereby acknowledges receipt and approves the 2022 consolidated financial statements for the Township of Bonfield as prepared by the firm of BDO Canada LLP, and that Council directs the CAO to provide public notice that a copy of the 2022 consolidated financial statements be available at the municipal office and on the township's website in accordance with Section 295 of the Municipal Act 2001. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Council
you.
meeting. I look forward to
And
working with
again,
you.
thank you
Give
for
me the
your-
opportunity. Bye, Nikki.
Thank you
Be
for
in
your
touch.
generosity. as
Oh,
well.
yes, that's right. Okay, I'll get back to you on that.
No. Thank you.
All right, next we go to closed session. So,
Do you want to read the motion and then we'll go in?
oh, sorry. You kind of being lazy tonight. Moved by Councillor Corbett, second by Councillor Featherstone, that the meeting of council hereby proceeds to closed session in accordance with Section 239 Municipal Act 2001 as amended at
7:49.
7:49 p.m. for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, labor relations, or employee negotiations. Any question? All in favor? Carried.